Okay guys, this is your practical number 2, the skull. You have quite a bit that we have to get through, so let's get going now, so this isn't too terribly long. So we'll start with the fossae, and the fossae or fossa. A fossa is like a divot, a fossa. So we have anterior, middle, and posterior. If we open up, take the cap off of the skull and look down into the skull, here's the anterior fossa, the sphenoid bone, and we'll get to that in a little bit. This is the middle fossa, and right here on the back, these are going to be the posterior fossae. The frontal bone. Okay, remember the frontal bone is going to be where your sinuses are. So inside of, you take the cap off again, and we're looking at the front, and we tip here. Inside there's going to be space here. Those are going to be your frontal sinuses. Okay. This skull was a bad one to pick because it's hard to see any foramen. There are no holes here, but here's where your eyebrows would be. So this would be your supraorbital, above the orbits, eyes, margin. So you should feel this here. Make sure that you know on some of the skulls, these foramen, there's supposed to be holes right here, and those allow for blood vessels and nerves to go in. This particular skull does not have them, but make sure that you know it is on your list. Find a skull that has them. My apologies for not finding one myself. The parietal bone, I'm just looking at the cap. So this is the front anterior, this is posterior. These on the top are the parietal bones. When we start talking about sella turcica, this is going to be on the inside. So I'm going pretty fast, guys, so you can pause this as we go. It's not like you can't turn it off and kind of move the skull the way you need it to be. I'm looking down inside the skull. Right in here is called sella turcica. This is all this in here, and I think I mentioned the sphenoid bone in class today, and it is the 22nd. This whole shape here looks like a butterfly. That is called the sphenoid bone. The sella turcica is right here. This is where your pituitary gland resides from your brain. The optic foramen, your eyes, you will see. There's a foramen, let me get my pencil here. The optic foramen are in here. There's one on each eye. This is where the nerves pass to allow, your optic nerve passes to allow service, for lack of a better word right now, to your eyes. Okay, we have 3 foramen we have to, and they're on both sides. So I'm going to start on this side so we can see it. So this is foramen ovale. This little guy is foramen spinosum. And this guy right here is foramen rotundum. So ovale, spinosum, rotundum. Okay. The temporal bone is, of course, on the side of the skull. So we need to talk about the mastoid process. This is this big bump, and you can actually feel this around your ear, below your ear. Speaking of your ear, this hole right here, or this kind of indent canal, this is your external auditory meatus. In other words, it's your ear hole. On this side, we have the zygomatic process. This is part of your cheekbone. This whole thing is the zygomatic bone. Right here, this arch, I'm going to turn this so you can see how thin it is. That's your zygomatic process. Let me take the jaw away, the mandibular fossa. This is where your mandible is going to sit inside of your skull. There's one right here. And of course, there's one on the other side where the mandible fits into the skull. I can't do this with one hand. The styloid process. This is this pen. If you know what a stylus is, that's a pen. So this kind of looks like the tip of a pen. That's why they call it the styloid process. If you look inside where the ear comes in, obviously, we need to find the ear. Where's the ear hole? Right here is the internal acoustic meatus. So this is where the ear, what's the name of that nerve? I can't think of it right now. Comes into the brain right here through this hole from the outside. Okay. Foramen magnum. So now we're on the occipital bone. Foramen magnum means big hole. A foramen is a hole. Magnum means big. So this is foramen magnum. The occipital condyles. Okay, the occipital condyles are these two right here. They're on either side of foramen magnum. They are normally nice and smooth. Condyles are smooth articular surfaces. This allows for the articulation of the spinal column with the skull. The ethmoid bone. Let's talk about the cribiform plate. That is right in here, right up here. This isn't a really good one, but the cribiform plate is here. Palatine bone, sorry if I'm going fast, but I don't want to make this too terribly long, is the palate. This is the roof of your mouth. It's hard, okay? You have a soft palate and a hard palate. The palatine bone is hard, okay? Here is the mandible, okay? This is the jawbone, the lower jawbone. Turn this up. So it would go here, it would articulate. The mandibular condyle. This is the condyle that articulates with the, fossa, the mandibular fossa, okay? Mental foramen, these are the holes, okay? Mental foramen. Angle of the mandible, pretty easy. Intermaxillary suture, there are some, excuse me, no, that's not down there. Intermaxilla, the maxilla is up here. This whole area is the maxilla. The suture, the intermaxillary suture, is right down the middle. And on this skull, it's not so prominent, but some of the skulls it really is. But in between the two sides, there's a little line. That's your intermaxillary suture. Your mental protuberance is, some people's are more prominent than others. This is the jaw, the tip of your jaw, mandible. And the ramus. A ramus is like a nice flat surface right here. So this whole area on both sides, that's the ramus. Okay. Again, the maxilla is here. Your nasal bone is up here. Your zygomatic bone, the whole zygomatic bone. Like I said, I already pointed out the process. This whole thing is your cheekbone. Okay, that is your zygomatic bone. Lacrimal bone is right in here. These little holes, those are the tear ducts. That's where the tears come out. Lacrimal means your tears, lacrimal fluid. So when I'm holding right here, that's your lacrimal bone on either side. Inferior nasal conchae, there's little ridges on the inside of the nose. These are the inferior ones. That's all you need to know. The vomer bone, that's this bone that goes right down the middle here. When we talk about sutures, remember I told you when you're born you're made of cartilage. So there are spaces, and these will all close as sutures as we grow and get older and mature. So this suture right here, I'm trying to not to put this back on, but this is the front. That's really hard. There we go. This is the front, right? So this is the coronal suture. Remember that coronal plane. This should make sense. Sagittal suture, I turn the skull around. This is the back of the skull. This is the sagittal suture. The lambdoidal suture separates the occipital bone from the two parietal bones. And then we have the squamous suture, which is on the side that separates the temporal bones from the parietal bones and some of the frontal. Okay. Last thing I need to talk about is fontanelles. These are called soft spots. Soft spots are, when we're born, obviously we can't have the same size skull because our brain has to grow. So we have to have little soft spots here to allow the growth of the brain, and when the brain's fully grown, these sutures will come shut. So we need to talk about where these fontanelles or soft spots are. I'm looking at the top, if you can see the front here, the top of the skull where this coronal suture meets the sagittal suture at the frontal bone, that is the frontal fontanelle. Back here where the sagittal suture meets the occipital bone, this would be the occipital fontanelle. You have two sphenoid fontanelles. The sphenoid fontanelles are right here where the coronal and this squamous suture would meet. So there's one on this side and one on the other side. And then finally, we have the mastoid. Remember where the mastoid process is, the end of this squamous suture where it comes back here and meets the lambdoidal suture on both sides of the skull. This around here would be the mastoid fontanelle. And that's practical number 2, the skull.